Late night hikers. What is the creepiest thing you have seen while hiking? I used to often spend my summers bouldering with my friends by a relatively large forest that was about an hour and a half away from where I used to live. We used to spend some of the nights camping out there just to save some travel costs and time. Anyway, I think this was roughly like the third or fourth time we were out there camping. My friend had left all her climbing gear and her rucksack just outside her tent, or we definitely think she did anyway. The next morning, we found her boots, a few clothes, and all her chalk powder had disappeared. We figured that it could have been completely feasible that she misplaced it. Although we were quite sure that they were next to her tent, we didn't really want to believe that they were stolen. Anyway, we didn't read too much into this, and just stupidly said to ourselves that perhaps she had left it by the boulders, and some animal took an interest to it. I know it sounds stupid, but it was very reasonable to us at the time. Anyway, fast forward a year, we're at the same spot as usual, sitting by the tents and chilling after having some food. Mind you, it's pitch black out, and only the camp area is lit by the fire. I go somewhere a bit out of sight for a slash, and what do I see? A dude in a full-on ghillie suit laying on his stomach looking right towards our campsite. I kinda stood there frozen as this dude clocks that I've seen him, and he just bolts it out of there. I don't know whether the event to the year prior was related to the ghillie guy, but this definitely has stuck to all of us. We haven't been back there since, which is a damn shame. Not hiking so much as car camping, but we were way the duck out there in the middle of nowhere on Blim Land in Colorado. We drove for an hour and a half down a Forest Service road and didn't see another soul. You could see headlights and hear cars from miles away from our campsite. It's not like somebody could have snuck up unnoticed. We had 3 cars with us and 8 people. Just got done eating dinner, cleaned up. It was getting dark, so we went back to the cars real quick before hitting our tents for the night. Somebody had slashed the front right tire on each of the 3 cars with what appeared to be a box cutter. Everyone thought it was a prank, but it became very apparent, very quickly, that it wasn't. All of us were beyond spooked, like panicking, scary to watch. Spooked. We all had spares, and one dude had a GN. So we threw on our donuts while that guy literally guarded us, and got the hell out of there. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. Just knowing there was some person, probably watching us, maybe wanting to harm us, makes me feel physically ill to this day. I go hiking in the woods that permeate my town, sometimes so late that I get to see the sunrise out there. The strangest thing I ever saw was what I could only describe as a shantytown was built up seemingly overnight, deep into the woods. Simple little hovels made of scrap metal and bed sheets, and a small fire pit that someone had made out of an old tire, with the fire still burning. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was that this was well past midnight when I found this place, and it was quiet as a grave. There was no one there. Someone made the trouble of getting a fire going, and then left it. From the look of it, this place could hold about a dozen or so people, and yet there was nothing there but the fire they abandoned and whatever possessions they had left in the shanties. When I was younger and stupider and going to college in the North Georgia mountains, my friends and I would go night hiking a lot on the trails near campus. I got pretty familiar with the area, and being out in the wilderness at night in general, which probably made me too confident. One night, the full moon was out, and the weather was perfect, so visibility was crazy good. Everything was basically washed in dim blue light. I was slightly stoned, and feeling adventurous, and I love doing fun stuff alone, so I decided to go enjoy a night hike by myself. I took a flashlight, but this was around 2002. So no cell phone. I chose a super easy trail that was mostly flat, maybe a mile loop, in pretty secluded area, but not exactly a national park or anything very rural area. I didn't even need my flashlight for most of it, and just hiked in the moonlight. It was actually a really cool, beautiful experience at first. At some point, I started feeling uneasy, and maybe a millisecond later, I heard a man's voice. It was coming from a good distance ahead of me, somewhere off in the woods, maybe from the right side of the trail. He was crying. I'm honestly an empathetic person, and 99.9% of the time I hear someone crying, I want to help them in some way. But this time, I felt sick in the stomach, like a dry panic attack, if that makes sense. I remember coming very close to calling out to him, because my brain was trying to tell me he might be hurt, which was the only reason I hesitated, but it was like my body shut my voice down before I could say anything. And I knew I had to stay very quiet. He was sobbing like he'd just found out a loved one had died, but also gibbering, and almost babbling, like he was less than a person. There was a shrillness to it, under his crying, like he was holding back a scream, but perpetually, on and on, as if he'd been doing it all night. I remember it vividly, and my spine is tingling like crazy even as I write this. It's hard to explain, but I knew deep down he wasn't right in the head, and nothing good would happen if he realized I was listening. I went back the way I came. It was like I had tunnel hearing, and the only sound in the world was that crying. I was hyper aware of everything else around me, and beyond paranoid that I would snap a branch or snag my boot on something. I worried the man's crying would get louder if I wasn't paying razor-sharp attention, getting closer, or turn into an outraged crazy person scream. Thankfully, it just faded the further I got from it, and I made it back to my car. Still, I was convinced some wild-eyed hermit was going to rush out of the forest and bite me to death. Right up to the second I locked my doors and got the duck out of there, I finally had the rest of my panic attack on the drive back. I managed to park back at campus, and I just sat in the car and collected myself. Adrenaline is ducking powerful. I have never felt a shred of guilt about leaving that guy crying out in the woods in the dark. I know I was slightly stoned, but slightly is the key word there. I'm convinced to this day I was in very real danger that night. Definitely not as insane as most of the stories and threads like this, but sometimes I get that same sick feeling deep down. Whenever I wonder what might have happened if the moon been less bright, or if I'd been more responsible, and I decided to use my flashlight even once, he'd have seen me for sure. I go out for walks very late at night fairly often, so I've seen a few things. The creepiest, though, happened about 2 months ago. I left the house around 1:30 a.m. and it started off as a normal walk. I wandered around the town till about 2 o'clock a.m. when I decided to go home. I was walking back the route I had came when I noticed a black van meander down the street. Didn't really pay too much attention to it though, at first. I did pay attention though, when I saw it slowly drive by me for a second time. I wasn't entirely sure it was the same van though, so I just continued walking, but this time kept an eye out. And lo and ducking, behold, about 10 minutes later, the same damn black van came down the street again. This time I knew for sure because it didn't have license plates. Now, I was fairly scared, so I picked my pace up a little bit. When the van came around again, this time, it stopped in the middle of the road, a few houses in front of me. I stopped, turned around, and booked it back in the other direction. I made a few turns onto different roads, and then ran right into someone's yard. I waited behind their fence, and the same ducking van came down the street. I assumed that when they couldn't find me, they finally decided to duck off, but I waited in that yard for about 20 minutes before I ran back to my house and practically threw myself through my bedroom window. This happened to me a few years ago. I used to go to school at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'm a runner, and the campus is in a beautiful redwood forest, so I would run on the trails. One day I left a little later than usual on a run through one of the more isolated trails. Here's where it gets weird. I was about 15 minutes running deep into the woods, and still hadn't seen anyone else around. Suddenly, up ahead, I saw what appeared to be a homeless man in ragged clothing walking on the trail. Now, he was walking further into the woods, and this path went very, very far, and the sun was setting. AITAH. This man was spending the night in the woods. I wanted to reach my usual running checkpoint before turning back, so I decided to keep my distance and run by. As soon as I passed the man, he called out to me. What came first, light or sound? In my head I was like, WF? This guy is nuts, but I decided to humor him and yelled out light. Without looking back, he said, well, I think it's sound, but who knows, and started mumbling to himself. I continued on. I reached my goal and started to head back. It was really dark now, and I was feeling sketched out that I had to pass this guy again to get back. He seemed pretty crazy and potentially dangerous, but I didn't have a choice. I got past the point where I first passed him, but he was nowhere to be seen. There weren't any other branches of the trail, and if he had headed back, I would have seen him by then. He must have gone off the trail. Suddenly, a girl from up on a hill screamed for me to stop. I stopped and looked up on the hill, but it was too dark to see anything. I was freaked out. I called out to ask if she was alright and eventually saw her climbing down. The hill was really steep, so she put in a lot of effort to get up there and away from whatever was after her. She said that she was on a run when a scary homeless guy started harassing her and he chased her up the hill, but she didn't know where he went. She was going to spend the night there until I came along, because she was too scared to go back down. At this point, we both wanted to get the hell out of there. Who knew if this creepy man was, like, lurking around, watching us from the dark? So we ran back together and made it to the road. She thanked me, and we parted ways. Never ran back on that trail again. Santa Cruz can be a pretty weird place. I've heard legends of students flunking out of school there and then just living in the forest. Maybe this guy was a student from years past. One night, my friend and I decided to hike to the top of this small mountain at night for a meteor shower. There were 4 of us, all around 16 at the time, and thought it would be cool. We drove over and started hiking. We took a break about halfway when we noticed there was a guy following us. In a business suit, we were weirded out, so we decided to start back up and walk a bit faster. But by the next time we stopped, he was like 10 feet away. So we bit the bullet to see if he'd just walk by. He didn't. He stopped and asked if we were there for the meteor shower and if he could walk with us. Weird. A 30-something-year-old man in a suit wanting to hike with for 16-year-olds. But whatever. As we were walking, my friend and I noticed he was walking really close to our friend, the only girl in the group, like he could smell her shampoo. Close. We got to the top, sat down, and he sat down almost right up on our friend. With her reasonably freaked out, I made an excuse on why we have to leave early, and we promptly booked at the Duck out of there, nearly running the entire way down. When we got back to the car, we thought, cool, we ditched the weirdo. But no, when we were all in the car, my friend pointed out that this guy is full-on sprinting down the trail and towards our car with a large stick. Being in a car, we just drove out of there very shook up. We chalked it up to some dude on some hell of a DRG. But 2 days later, we all got a text linking us to a news report about a guy that had star-angled his wife, and then proceeded to KL another girl later that night on a hiking trail. It was the guy. The same dude at the same hiking trail. We never told our parents about the incident and never went back there. Ever.